Good evening. We had hoped to bring you a live interview with OJ Simpson at this hour. It was to be his first interview since his acquittal last week on murder charges. But Simpson and his lawyers canceled the interview earlier today. And here with the story of what happened is NBC's Mike Besser.
I'm hearing you back now.
NBC was ready. The protesters were ready for NBC. The police were ready for the protesters. And the world was ready to watch all of it. In the end, though, OJ Simpson was not ready.
Good afternoon from Los Angeles, everyone.
7 hours before the interview was to have aired, NBC's Tom Brokaw announced that OJ Simpson and his lawyers had backed out.
They said, because of the civil suits that he faces from the families of Nicole Brown and Ron Goldman. They also objected to reports of the nature of the questions that Katie Couric and I were prepared to ask.
In a statement read by his attorney, Johnny Cochran, Simpson seemed concerned about the tenor of the planned interview.
It has become clear that NBC has, perhaps in an attempt to appease the first public viewpoint, concluded that this would be a time and an opportunity to retry me. It was agreed that this would be a conversation, not a confrontation.
NBC News President Andy Lack, who spoke to Simpson directly when the interview was arranged and when it was canceled, said there was no ambiguity about how the interview would be conducted.
I think he was increasingly concerned that he was going to have a cross-examination on his hands, and that he was going to be sitting on a witness stand rather than in a director's chair in a television studio. I made it clear yesterday, and I made it clear to him in my first conversation with him. We're journalists. We're not lawyers. We're not prosecutors. We come with questions that many people in America have been asking.
Bob Baker, who will represent Simpson in the wrongful death civil suits filed by the victims' families, contended his client was not afraid of the questions. His attorneys were.
It wasn't because they're hard questions, and it wasn't because Mr. Simpson is not capable of answering them. It was because it would be a dereliction of our duty as his attorney to allow him to go forward with those questions at a time when these people are trying to take his property away from him.
Millions of dollars in property if Simpson were to lose the suit. John Kelly, the lawyer representing the estate of Nicole Brown, took a skeptical view of Simpson's cancellation.
Assuming Mr. Simpson is innocent and had nothing to do with this crime, and assuming he was going to be forthright, frank and truthful in answering these questions, I don't think it would have had any effect. He would have no problem being consistent in his interview on the air and answering questions under oath further on down the road. If he was going to be truthful and had nothing to hide.
The attorneys that are suing him will have the statement he gave to the police. If he says something different in an interview such as this, they'll use that against him. And they'll argue to the jury, see, he can't even remember what his story is, so you people should conclude he's not telling the truth. That's the real danger here.
Even though the interview was canceled, protesters from the National Organization for Women still gathered outside NBC's Burbank studios. They said this was a demonstration of victory.
If he had something to say, he could have said it to us in the last 15 months on the witness stand. He chose not to do so. I think that sends a message in and of itself.
Not guilty.
Simpson had hoped that his message would improve his public image, still tarnished despite the not guilty verdict.
OJ's pulling out of this interview last minute is a PR person's worst nightmare. It raises all kinds of suspicions that needn't have been raised.
And what about NBC's image?
We just approached this appropriately as a real news interview. And when the subject of the interview did not want to participate anymore in a real news interview, had something else in mind, the interview was canceled. And I think almost any other news organization worth its salt would have responded in the same way.
Through all of this, however, neither side completely closed the door. O.J. Simpson could still have his day on air.
NBC News won't yield in its responsibility. We will conduct that interview. I hope that we will be able to do it when Mr. Simpson feels it's the appropriate time.